Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of On the Mark here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and today, this hour, we're going to talk about how to present yourself, how to network, and how to get yourself out and about, particularly in this day when we have to social distance, or maybe we're working remote, and some of these opportunities have passed us by. Our first guest today is Jeffrey Dreisbeck from McCorkle Casting in New York. And McCorkle Casting are the people that develop and put together the casts for Broadway shows and regional theater, TV, and film. And the whole audition process has changed during the pandemic. And it used to be, like you saw in the movies, lines of people waiting to try out for a play and at the stage door. And now a lot of it's done by video. And of course, the whole idea of presenting yourself by video has changed and developed and grown in this world of Zoom. So Jeffrey's here to share a few pointers and some advice. Good morning, Jeffrey. Always great to see you.
You too, Mark. You're looking well, and thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you, and you know, we had a chance earlier this year to chat with you and your wife about what casting directors do, because McCorkle casting is one of the major casting organizations in the country, and the theaters that you work with and all of that. Now that theaters are kind of back up and running, are you guys busier than ever, or are things still waiting to move forward?
I tell you, Mark, it feels like popcorn in the microwave. So many things are taking off right now. Currently, our office, and I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating when I'm telling you, we're working on 6 feature films right now. It's like crazy. People call, I don't even know who they are anymore. It's just ridiculous. But additionally, we are excited to share with you that the Guthrie Theater is now open. And we just finished casting an off-Broadway show. We just kicked off rehearsals yesterday for a revival of Mornings at 7. It's going to be in New York. The cast is Tony Roberts, Judith Ivey, John Rubenstein, Dan Loria. So a really an amazing cast. So Happily Theater is now also coming back. All through the pandemic, though, the feature film industry has been percolating for us. So we've been extremely grateful for those opportunities that have come our way. And it seems like it's growing now exponentially.
And of course, the theaters here in Western Massachusetts have been rolling all summer, and in Connecticut as well. TheaterWorks in Hartford never really paused. I mean, they went to doing streaming, but they had a great show live this summer. And Berkshire Theater, Barrington Stage have all gone back to live performances. Hopefully,
we've been excited about that at Barrington Stage, especially because they never shut down as well, and they just were so conscientious about how to do it right during this pandemic that it was a real honor to be part of that organization and to cast for them all through this time.
Yeah, and one of the things, I mean, them, along with Berkshire Theater Group, were the 2 arts organizations in the Berkshires that never stopped. And they were both recipients of major dollars from a donor who was so appreciative of the fact that they continued to perform when everybody else closed down. And they performed rather innovatively. I mean, Berkshire Theater Group built a tent outside of one of its theaters, and they actually did last Thanksgiving through Christmas an outdoor production of Holiday Memories, which I will never forget going to because I don't think I've ever been so cold in my entire life. And Barrington Stage put up a tent. I saw a couple of shows this summer at a tent at their production center.
Yes.
And it harkens back to when we were kids, Jeffrey, and summer stock and tent theaters were sort of like all over the map.
It's so true. And right next to the Barrington Stage tent was the train tracks. And one of the shows, apparently they had 7 trains. And I'm literally 100 feet away from the train tracks. And so what was amazing is apparently the actors just paused, just took a breath, and then picked it right up after the train left. But that happened 7 times in one night, from what I understand.
Well, there was another theater company here called the Chester Theater, which
sure.
They moved their performances to a tent at Hancock Shaker Village, which is a restored Shaker Village in the Berkshires. Gorgeous place to go.
Yes, it is.
And the theater area was next to a cow pasture, and the cows would wander over. And there was a solo show called Title and Deed, starring James Barry, which I went to. Opening night, one of the cows got extremely interested and wandered right over to the performing area, and he's doing this incredible monologue, and all of a sudden the cow starts mooing, and he just went with the flow of it. But I mean, that's kind of the fun of taking your theater outdoors.
That's it. When we were young, that's when actors earned their stripes. They could handle whatever situation was presented them live on stage, and that's part of the excitement. I think that's part of the fun of it, for sure.
Yeah. A lot of going to the audition process, it used to be that people would go to a theater and audition, like you see in the movies, 42nd Street or whatever. And the director and his or her group of people are sitting at a table in maybe the third or the fourth row of the orchestra section, and people are being lined up one after another on stage. Auditions sort of don't happen that way anymore. A lot of it's by video.
Yes, we are, and we'll continue. And I don't know if this is discouraging for some, but it's been so positive for us, is that Zoom auditioning is going to be around for some time to come. First of all, Mark, it is so economical. We don't have to fly a director in. We don't have to put a director up. We don't have to necessarily be live. And I'm talking about first round auditions. I'm not necessarily talking about the callback. And the callback is after you've seen a number of actors for a role, you bring back the favorite actors that you want to see again. And that's just the next step in the process. But our initial interviews, Zoom auditioning is a thing now. And I love to teach, and I've actually taught classes for actors on how to Zoom and how to present yourself really well on camera in Zoom, because I know it, yet it is another skill set that the actor has to adapt to. But nevertheless, it is such an efficient way of doing it. So the producer, the director, and the casting director, the reader are in the Zoom room. And then one at a time, we'll bring the actor in. We have a slight conversation. They've been given the sides or the script, and then they audition with the reader in the room. And then next is called, and thank you very much. And then the next actor is brought in. What's really the positive side of that is that we're able to see more talent in the same period of time than we were when we were doing it live. I'd have to get up out of the chair, escort the actor out of the room, bring in the next actor. All of the logistics have just sort of been streamlined. And so, as discouraging as it could sound to some actors, the encouraging thing is we're actually able to see more talent. And I think as a first round of auditions, it's a really efficient way. And to me, that's where technology has been able to be very beneficial to our industry, for sure.
As you look at in general, away from casting, but you look at people that are now applying for jobs, and their job interviews have moved and pivoted to Zoom. It used to be you'd get a first round interview if you were lucky, or maybe a phone call in advance by a recruiter or a headhunter or a personnel person asking some basic questions. Yeah. And then you'd be called in for the interview. And now it's happening on Zoom, and the second interviews and the third interviews, because again, somebody can be sitting in their office. They don't have to fly the people in. They don't have to house them while they're doing it. So when you're advising people to audition by Zoom, let's say you were advising somebody who's going for a job interview by Zoom, what are the basics that they have to keep in mind as they're Zooming and trying to show off their best stuff?
That's a fantastic question, because if you think about it, every audition is in essence a job interview. And so the parallels are there. I think that a lot of times the interviewee does not treat the environment as professional as they might. And that literally means your presentation, the energy you present at an interview is even more acute And recruiters are even more aware of those physical attributes, exactly, how you're dressed, the environment that you're presenting yourself in. Can you be heard? Can you be seen? So that means microphone, perhaps. A lavalier microphone, by the way, on Amazon costs $20. It plugs right into your device, and you get really excellent, what they say is crispy sound. Additionally, some lighting. You have to just be aware of the environment that's going on behind you. We've all seen the videos, right, of the man who's trying to do an interview and the cat is on the bookshelf cleaning itself, or, the little kid is running around behind the scenes. All of those things are contributing to the overall impression that you are making. And this is my wheelhouse. I just love talking about this because even in the podcast, but working with actors in classes, it's all about your energy, and having that professional sort of presentation can really go a long way towards affecting you to going to the next level.
Exactly. And when you say about the backgrounds and the noises, I mean, the public and interviewers and casting, we're all relatively forgiving with Zoom. I mean,
That's right.
There's certain things that are going to happen that we're going to accept, like a cat running across, it happens. And we're at home in a lot of cases. But we really can do a lot to make sure that what we're doing is as professional as possible.
Well, what's really funny, and this is an absolutely true story, is that we received submissions for projects. And these are actors who are given the materials. They put themselves on video, either using their smartphone or their Zoom device, whatever that might be, their laptop. And one actor who I know you know who it is, but I can't share that with you because it might be a little embarrassing. But the actor is doing the monologue and they're acting their heart out. And I am not kidding you. I'm sure it's named like Fluffy or Muffy the cat, jumped up on the bookshelf and started, a serious cleaning. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That cat went to town. Now, do you think I'm watching the actor?
No, of course not. You're watching the cat.
No, that's right. I'm watching Muffy do its thing. And no disrespect intended for the actor at all. It was just one of those inadvertent things. But anything that can take me out of getting more information about you is something that needs to be addressed.
Well, how do you recommend people dress if they're Zooming? For example, I mean, we all know that from the waist up, you have to look presentable, and a lot of us are in sweats and shorts and everything from the waist down.
Well, and I am wearing pants right now. I just want you to be aware of that.
Well, I'm wearing shorts because I'm seated, but if I had to stand up in a program and walk across the studio, you'd know that.
So I think the dress is exactly how you would dress for a live interview. It really just comes down to two things. One is how you are being seen by others, and that's important. But to me, I always tell actors to never wear a costume when they're auditioning. So it's not about playing the part. It's wearing clothing that you feel great in. That's even more important. Sure, everyone feels really great in their old jeans and their sloppy t-shirt. But what I'm talking about is, in Halloween when we were kids and we put on a costume, we actually felt like the character we were playing. In the same way, just being really confident and comfortable in your clothing, but also making sure that it is appropriate for the job can go a real long way. And just taking a moment or two just to think about it is really enough, because your good sense, your good judgment is going to be able to make those decisions. And I wouldn't go too crazy. You don't have to do like overly formal, but depending upon the job, you certainly wouldn't interview for a position as a lawyer if you showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. So there's some logic there that dictates what you should wear, but comfortable is more important in my view.
Yeah. What do you do about background noises? Now, here's one of the situations. I've come up against as a radio person. I do some of my radio stuff from home. I've got a great little studio set up. The lighting is great. The sound is great and all that. But I really can't control the ambient noises of a loud truck pulling up or the lawnmower outside or stuff like that. How do you, when you're doing a Zoom type of thing, how do you minimize that?
Unless it is really invasive, I would not even bring it up. I think the technology is such that we are certainly very forgiving of those kinds of things that happen. But if it's something over the top, extraordinary, and then of course you should acknowledge it, saying, "Oh, I apologize for that siren. Apparently somebody is like really having some problems right outside my door." Then that becomes something that I just wouldn't pay attention to it. I would just move on. I would just stay very, very present. But unless it's brought up or something so obvious, then I think you should acknowledge it, but then move on. It's not about making more out of it than it needs to be, because like I said, we're very forgiving in these kinds of situations, I think.
Yeah. Should people practice their presentations if they're doing Zoom? For example, if you're in a Zoom meeting and you're trying to make a presentation about a product or a service, you know that if you're live, you might be either at the end of a conference table with people around you, or you might be at a lectern or a podium if it's a larger type of thing. But generally, in a situation like that, you might practice your speech once or twice just to get a feel for the room and everything else. What do you do when you do Zoom? Do you do the same kind of practicing and preparation?
I would, but my approach to it might be slightly different. I tell actors that the biggest mistake you can make in an audition is to try to recreate what you rehearsed. In other words, if you structure your audition exactly like you were when you were alone in your apartment working on the piece, chances are you're not going to be present when you are auditioning. In the same way, if anyone finds themselves in this situation, I think you should work on it, rehearse it until you feel, here's the big word, confident, and then stop. It's about the confidence factor that you know your facts and figures, that you're familiar with the questions that could be asked. So get to the level of confidence. Don't get to the level of trying to memorize your presentation, because it's like deer in the headlights. When you see somebody who's tried to really work on it so much that they have memorized answers, you see that kind of like fear factor show up in their face. And it's clearly not someone who's present. I think any recruiter wants to get a sense of who that person is. Also, I have to say that any job interview, the person who is interviewing you wants you to get the job. They're not analyzing you or whether you're a good person or not. They really are rooting for you because it makes their job easier. That's why I'm always, on the actor side, pro actor. In the same way, any job interview, the person on the other side of the desk wants you to book the gig. And so therefore, I think the attitude about having to win someone over is a mistake. I think it's about being very present and being confident in the information you're providing.
I totally agree with you. Jeffrey, we're going to take a fast break here to acknowledge the underwriters that make programming like On the Mark and other programs here possible on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. Our guest is Jeffrey Dreisbach from McCorkle Casting in New York City. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll return after these messages.
Support for community radio on WSKB is provided by Betts Plumbing and Heating Supply Company, an independent, family-owned wholesaler serving Westfield for over 50 years. Specializing in plumbing, heating, and industrial piping supplies. On the web at bettsplumbing.com or at 14 Coleman Avenue in Westfield. Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
Hi, it's Bob Plass, and I have Wow, It's Tuesday every Tuesday, 6 to 8. Wow, it's Tuesday.
Community Radio
89.5 WSFD.
I did it!
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. If you've missed a part of today's program or you want to catch it again, it'll be archived at WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. Jeffrey Dreisbach from McCorkle Casting in New York is my guest for this first half hour. In a day when we're talking about networking and presentation, something good for all of us as we either are looking for something new in the job market or trying to sell our product or services on video, since the pandemic has made it really impossible for a lot of us to get out there and network in person. Although it's starting to change, there's been a little rollback in the last couple of weeks and people are taking it a little bit more cautiously. Jeffrey, I forgot to mention earlier on that you've got this incredible podcast with all kinds of good advice. Tell people where they can find it and where they can find your website.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I'm always up for a shameless promotional plug.
Yeah, yes, by all means, promote yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's called Casting Actors Cast. And I started it about 3 years ago, and it's gone beyond my wildest dreams. It's free. It's 20 minutes. It's once a week on any podcast provider. So wherever you get your podcast, but it's advice to actors. It's about acting advice, but it's also about career advice, how actors need to approach the business of show. And so I just take a subject. My ego is way too fragile to have guests on my show. So I end up just doing a 20-minute sort of riff on a particular subject that relates to actors, acting, show business. But you know what? I talk a lot just about the creative process as well. So for those of you who might be interested in just, feeling creative in whatever environment you're in, you might just want to check that out. I certainly would love to have more listeners, but as of today, over 65,000 people are downloading the podcast. So I'm getting fan mail from all over the world, which is something I never expected. Well, at least I think it's fan mail. I don't know how to read German or Swedish, so what can I say?
Well, that's what Google Translator comes in well.
That's right. You're right.
This program and my ArtSpeed program end up on YouTube, and then people share them, and they get shared on social media and things, and the comments come back to me from all over the place. I never thought that a program that's generated from Westfield, Massachusetts could be heard or seen somewhere across the world.
It's so amazing and so cool. I think that being able to have a sense of community in doing this kind of work has made all the difference in terms of COVID for me and Pat and our company. And just for the podcast to be able to have that kind of a reach and getting the kindness coming back at me is just, that's been so rewarding for sure. Well,
I mean, the podcast is not part of McCorkle Casting. It's more of your own thing.
That's right.
What made you decide to do this?
So, I've had a couple of incarnations. I was an actor for 20 years and I loved every second of my acting. And then I just wanted to do something else. After the last Broadway show I was in, I thought, you know what, there might be something else for me out there. And so I just on a whim, I enrolled at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Because I just thought, well, this might be really cool. Because I had a house up in Western Massachusetts. I thought maybe this is a great transition for me. The next thing I know, I'm hired as the executive director, and I'm opening up Connecticut School of Broadcasting schools throughout the East Coast, including Westbury, Long Island, and New York City, and Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. So it was crazy. So then after that, Pat said, well, why don't you just come on in and help me in the office, help me do some casting and help me do some of the administrative stuff. And I thought, well, okay. So I just keep saying yes. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse.
Yeah, but we should also tell people that you lived in Western Massachusetts for a long time. There was a film festival in Northampton that you helped run. That's where you and I first met.
Exactly right.
Although our theater circles, I think, we had traveled in the same circles, but never actually had a chance to meet. And
I'm sure we were at the same cocktail parties.
We had to have been. And,
of course.
And for a while, you were doing a lot of woodworking and furniture building in Western Mass. So
another hat that I was wearing. I just loved doing this, what's called tree art furniture, and taking branches. And I started doing that for a little while. And then, you know what? So the podcast is as a result of the teaching. I just loved teaching so much. In fact, I think my acting bug is being satisfied by standing in front of a classroom, or in this case, standing in front of a Zoom environment. And so after a lot of teaching gigs and being asked to do workshops at universities throughout the country, I thought, you know what, this might just be the perfect culmination of all of these hats that I wore. And that's where the podcast came about. And so I'm able to bring not only the acting background, but also the radio and television broadcasting background. So everything sort of culminates together. And it's been a sideline for me. I'm still, the partner at McCorkle Casting. But now that I have the podcast, it really does kind of fill up my day, and it recharges me in a really great way.
Yeah, and I do a whole variety of things, and one of the things I do is mentor young people. We actually have a program that runs on the network called What Young People Think, and I work with college journalism students and radio and TV students to learn to express themselves. And the teaching part of it and the giving back is so rewarding.
Totally right. And I think that's something that we are able to do in this new world that we are now in. We have that kind of outreach. You still are doing in-person classes. I'm still doing in-person teaching. But now there's a different kind of outreach. And that's why a lot of people are afraid of this technology. I'm just going with it. Let's just embrace it. Let's see what we can do to make it even more effective for people to change their lives, to feel better about where they are.
Well, Jeffrey, before we go, give your website out so everybody knows how to find you.
Great. So you can check out the current things that we are working at McCorkle Casting, McCorkle, the word casting.com. And the podcast is called Casting Actors Cast. It's exactly like it's spelled, all one word, Casting Actors Cast at .com, castingactorscast.com.
And I think you're also on Facebook, too.
Oh, yeah. I'm on Facebook. McCorkle Casting's on Facebook. Casting Actors Cast is on Facebook. I've got a lot of Facebook friends. That's about as much social media as I can do in any given day.
Exactly.
It's hard. It is hard, isn't it? You stay up with it so amazingly well.
Well, I try. I mean, it's sort of fun. Jeffrey, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us. And when we move into the upcoming summer season in the Berkshires, I know since you're casting so much stuff up there, you and Pat need to come back on my show.
It would be a pleasure and a delight. And I'm always admiring of your work and what you're able to do with your community. It's been amazing. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Best wishes.
Bye-bye.
We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more On the Mark after these messages. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today. We're broadcasting from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, and we'll be right back.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Westfield Bank. For more than 160 years, Westfield Bank has been an important community presence and commercial leader in the Pioneer Valley. With convenient full banking services in Westfield, West Springfield, East Longmeadow, Agawam, Feeding Hills, Springfield, Southwick, as well as Enfield and Granby, Connecticut, visit us on the web at westfieldbank.org.
Support for community radio on WSKB is provided by Betts Plumbing and Heating Supply Company, an independent, family-owned wholesaler serving Westfield for over 50 years, specializing in plumbing, heating, and industrial piping supplies. On the web at bettsplumbing.com or at 14 Coleman Avenue in Westfield.
Hi, this is Harry Rock, host of Rock on Westfield every fourth Wednesday at 8 a.m. Tune in for my view of this place I call home.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. You're either watching us on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, listening to us on 89.5 FM WSKB, or catching us by streaming on WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. Today's program is all about networking, and I've asked a friend of mine, Ruth Stevens, to join me. A little bit of background. Ruth and I were classmates at Northfield Mount Hermon School. Our career paths took sort of similar paths in terms of the fact that we're both marketeers and work with teaching and developing future marketeers and public relations people and all of that. We've been best of friends ever since high school. We had a chance at a reunion, not for our class, but for another, to actually co-present together. And it was a little workshop on public relations. And we both realized, never having talked about it before, that we share a similar philosophy about the importance of networking. Ruth is internationally known for her network marketing skills, and particularly in e-marketing and business-to-business marketing and communications. And although she's New York-based, she's taught all over the globe, from universities in Asia, India, and right here in the U.S. at Stern School in New York. Ruth, it's always good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark. I'm just so pleased to talk about this favorite topic.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we haven't seen each other in person since the pandemic began, but I know that a lot of your teaching, that you've had to pivot and teach new ways for your students to network and to develop databases and all of that, because they can't actually go out and meet other people. How did the pandemic impact you in terms of your work?
Well, we've all adjusted, I think, around the world to the Zoom life, the GoToMeeting life, and Google Meet and so forth. And we're actually starting to get pretty good at it. So that's a plus. But I would point out that one of the actual advantages of these online meeting platforms is that it can be geo-neutral, meaning you can invite people to your get-togethers online anywhere in the world or across the United States. So that one disadvantage that we had in in-person meetings is, mitigated by online meetings, as much as we find them exhausting and sometimes boring. So we have to be realistic.
Yeah. How did you adjust to it? Because you were always flying all over the place and meeting in person with people. How did Zoom and all of this work for you?
Well, most of my Stern classes immediately went to Zoom in the middle of March, like all of us. Interestingly, though, Stern had very wisely integrated the Zoom tool into its courseware sometime long before the pandemic. So unlike some schools that were really had to scramble, we could just switch to online teaching without missing a beat. Sadly, the trip to Portugal I was taking with my undergrad international studies students, that the next week, of course, was canceled. And as you said, I've really missed my foreign travel. At the same time, I've been able to do some international teaching online, but truthfully, my international teaching mission, for myself anyway, is what's known as academic tourism, meaning I'm really going because I want to go spend several months in an interesting city, and the teaching is sort of an excuse to get there and also to have something to do other than go to museums and temples. So I've really enjoyed it both ways.
I know how we as Americans and the way we do business has changed because of the pandemic, but how has it impacted some of the communities that you work with abroad? Are they adjusting the same way that we do? Do they have different parameters?
I'm really not up to speed on that because I've only done executive ed seminars abroad during COVID. I haven't done ordinary curriculums or ordinary business school teaching. What I hear from my friends at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, however, is that even today they are still doing everything by Zoom. Even though many of the students are living on campus, all of the teaching is online.
How did you adjust to Zoom? I mean, did you find it difficult? Was it an easy adjustment for you as an individual?
It was pretty easy. You know, they have been adding new functionality at a very rapid pace over the last year and a half, and it's much easier than it was at the beginning. I also was lucky enough to have the benefit of some. They have at NYU Stern, they have a learning science lab where we faculty members can go get education. And they had scores of online teaching seminars so that we could learn tricks like how to run a breakout room and how to populate the breakout room with specific teams versus random teams, and how to motivate students to engage. One of the great tools that I learned was to ask them to raise their hand, which is one of the features under the icon respond on Zoom. You can ask people to raise their hands, and that way their picture goes to the front of the room, in effect, on the array of all of the students' faces in the little squares. So that way I could call on them, and it feels almost like a classroom. And then, of course, the other technique is chat. So I would throw out questions that could have very short answers and ask them all to respond in the chat. And then I get to review what they're saying and even repeat it so that everybody can hear and make it more conversational than the dry, typing that it really represents. So there are lots of techniques that I learned.
So as we were all pivoting to Zoom and online stuff, did you go to a studio or to an office to do all of your work, or did you create one in your home?
Why do you think I have the blur feature on my Zoom background? Because I do it from home. And that brings up another topic, which is about how you look and how you sound. I immediately learned from a variety of professionals that the sound of the voice is even more important than how you look on the video. So I went out and bought myself a really good quality headset, which I'm still using. And in terms of the how you look thing, it's all about lighting. And so I have some tools, like, let me show you one of my favorite tools, Mark. It's a little $5 ring light that has a USB plug. And I can carry this with me, and it can light up my face if I'm in a room or at night, for example, and add extra light to my face. Not that I always want light on my wrinkles, but you get the concept.
I totally get the concept. People forget about that. I mean, I have set up a studio in the living room, and
impressive.
In the corner, and I've done some radio from it, and I've done, of course, all of my Zoom meetings. And I mean, I was watching everybody else's Zooms, and I thought I better have decent books in the bookcase behind me. So I put up books that I don't necessarily read, but they look good. And I try to make sure that there's no ambient noise coming from anywhere else in the house,
which is difficult in New York City. I've got ambulances zooming around all the time.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I've got the city bus. I've got people, the lawn people outside, and all of that, and loud neighbors. I mean, you can't always control something like that, but that makes it much more effective. And I think that people need to, if you're going to be spending a lot of time networking and working in social media and utilizing these platforms, you got to remember that people are watching you in a different way. Jeffrey Dreisbach, who was just on before, is a casting director, and he said what you wear and how you light yourself and what you look like is so important.
Right, right. Another trick I've learned just recently is to hide my own picture because it's distracting. And I've read in several articles that our eyes are naturally drawn to our own image, our own video. So it makes us less engaged, not only in our heads, but in the minds of others, because our eyes are distracted from the camera eye itself.
Yeah, that's something that people should be aware of. Like when we're doing radio right now, I'm watching on a Zoom screen. So I see myself, I see my hands moving constantly, which I'm not supposed to do. And then I see you. But if I'm watching me, I'm not paying attention to you. And so when you're in a Zoom, it really makes sense for you as the participant to be paying attention to the person who's speaking. And then when you're speaking, try to gaze across the screen at everybody.
Good advice. But why are you hesitant to let your hands, to gesture with your hands on a
Well, you see, I'm a radio person, Ruth. So generally, when I do radio, they hear my voice, and I'm real concerned about how my voice sounds. And, you know, I make sure that my voice is warmed up, which I recommend everybody does before they do Zoom. But when we started switching here to television as well as radio, I realized I'm a hand talker anyway. People need to steer clear, particularly if there's a cup of coffee within gesture distance, because I've spilled things talking with my hands. So I'm very aware of the fact that my hands move constantly while I'm talking. And it is such a distraction in the world of TV.
I see.
So you would probably, you know, we all know what our strengths are, whether we're doing TV or radio. And the voice is very important. I mean, I've always trained people or told people, clear your voice before you go into a Zoom meeting. Speak clearly, speak slowly. Don't slur your words. And remember, the microphone is not always forgiving. So there's certain, depending on how your teeth are structured, some people have what's called a sibilant S. I have that. So when I have a word that begins with an S, you hear a hiss come. It's an automatic thing. Other people pop their P's in front of a microphone. So if you're doing a presentation, you want to use words that are not going to bring out the bad sounds that your mouth makes. And a lot of us are heavy breathers, whether we mean to be or not, and the microphone is not forgiving. So oftentimes when someone else is speaking, it's a good idea to mute your mic so that they don't hear you gasping and whatever.
Good advice.
When you're networking with people abroad that have different cultural backgrounds or different understandings, and you're utilizing Zoom, what kind of advice do you offer in terms of adjusting so that you're working within their cultural norm in a Zoom versus your own?
That's a very interesting question and pretty easily solvable. Not necessarily Zoom specific, but culture specific guidance can be found online for any country. There are actually several websites that specialize in advising business people in how not to be impolite in their business etiquette in the culture where they're going to be visiting. So translating that to the online environment is a really good strategy. There are some cultures where there are really specific no-nos that would just never occur to us if we hadn't learned them in advance.
You do so much presenting, and whether it's written or whether you have your own podcast, which I try to listen to, and you're doing a lot of teaching and things like that. What are your priorities to make sure your presentation is right when you go out there?
Oh, presentations are so interesting. The part that I've been struggling with is making a distinction between the presentation as a handout, meaning it has to contain a lot of information, much of it in text, versus the presentation as a speaking aid or backup, in which case it needs to be much more illustrations, maybe charts or graphs, but not a lot of text. And this, of course, requires more work because I'm really asking myself to create two versions of the same presentation. In academic environments, lots of text on a slide is forgiven. But in, like, for example, a TED Talk, which is actually maybe an example on its own, but in a public forum where the material should really be emanating from my mouth versus what's on the screen, it's advisable to keep the number of words highly limited and to use a lot more images, if anything.
Yeah. Ruth, we're going to take a quick break to acknowledge the underwriters that make programming like On the Mark possible. Before we do, where can people find your podcast?
Oh, thanks. It's at West Virginia University, and it's called Marketing Horizons.
So on any podcast platform?
Absolutely.
And you have a website as well.
Thank you. Yes, it's ruthstevens.com.
Okay, we'll be back to chat more with Ruth Stevens after we acknowledge our underwriters. Peter Coles is our chief engineer today. You're watching us on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, listening to us on 89.5 FM WSKB, or streaming us on Westfield's WSKB Community Radio's YouTube channel. And if you missed part of the program, you can go back and catch it later, and we'll be right back.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by Bay State Dental. Comprehensive dentistry at 14 convenient locations in Springfield, Chicopee, Longmeadow, West Springfield, Belchertown, East Longmeadow, Ludlow, Northampton, Greenfield, and Wilbraham, as well as 29 Broad Street in Westfield. Bay State Dental makes it a priority to help you achieve and maintain the healthy smile you deserve. On the web at baystatedental.com. Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
This is Ken Stomsky from Ken's Den on WCPC 15 and 89.5 FM, Tuesdays 8 to 10.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back, everyone, to On the Mark. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer this morning. My guest is Ruth Stevens, who has been my friend and colleague for many years. We went to Northfield Mount Hermon School together as teenagers, and our careers have both been in marketing. We've had a chance a couple of times over the years to present together. In fact, most recently at a Northfield Mount Hermon reunion. It wasn't for our class, but it was for others, and we were teaching people how to look into the idea of second careers and how to approach being self-employed. Both Ruth and I are self-employed and have really done well with it, and we were sharing our expertise with others. Ruth, how did the pandemic change the way you did your work and your philosophy towards work in general?
Oh boy. I'm hearing more and more about this resignation era or resignation trend that seems to be a big result of the pandemic. And I think I might be falling prey to some of that as a 21-year self-employed person Mark, I can't wait to hear if this is true for you too. I have actually lost interest in some of the activities that I've been doing as part of my business practice over many decades, several decades. And I'm being more choosy now. I don't leap at every business opportunity, submit a proposal, or follow up on an idea. I am looking for more time to myself. For one thing, I'm working on a new book, and I want time for that. It's specific to B2B marketing or the B2B sales and marketing world. So it's a professional book of pretty limited interest probably to the student audience, but I'm energized to have a project like that to focus on.
Actually, I had similar feelings of, wanting to only pick and choose the things I wanted to do. But mine came before the pandemic. I was as you recall, I was in a really serious
terrible accident.
And in coming back to recovering and going back to work, there were clients and projects that I was doing that I just didn't care about. And I basically, over the course of the period and getting back, got rid of the work I didn't want to do, took on more of the work I did want to do. And, I'm I guess we're both in the points in our careers where we're not beginners anymore. We're, at the point where maybe we'll retire at some point in the not too distant future. And my business will have been, it'll be 35 years next year that I've been on my own. It's a long time. And
congratulations.
I mean, I would love to sit down and write a book. I can't motivate myself to write that book, but the pandemic was like the double whammy, because just when I got back on my feet, then all of a sudden it was like, stay home, do everything in the house, and all of that. So it's changed my perspective. When do you think you'll have your book out?
Oh, who knows? We want to have the manuscript done by the end of the year. Let's say first quarter. And we're going to self-publish this time. It's gotten harder and harder to find a publisher in our field. When I say our, I'm co-authoring with my same fellow author of our last book, which was B2B data-driven marketing. And our publisher went out of business. So we looked carefully at other options and have decided that self-publishing, there's really no shame in it anymore, and you get to control everything, and also you get to hold on to all the revenues. Of course, there's a certain amount of risk in production, pre-revenue investment, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be a fun route to go. So that is actually a tip, Mark, I would like to share with you. It's a lot more fun and motivating to produce a book with a partner, a co-author. So check that out. Check out that idea.
I agree. I mean, being self-employed, it's a joy and a blessing, because I get to call my own shots. But when I get to collaborate with good people, it makes whatever project I'm working on so much better than if I'm doing it solo. And so I try to collaborate as often as I can.
Very good.
So any last words of advice for people out there that are trying to hone their networking skills during this pandemic time?
Yes, I do. I do have some tips, Mark. Even though we have a lot fewer face-to-face networking meetings available to us, my advice is that if you're ever meeting a colleague or potential colleague or professional friend for the first time, I advise you to follow up the next day or maybe that evening with a LinkedIn connection request, a couple of sentences in a note saying, I enjoyed meeting you at wherever we met, and how about we link up here. I have found that LinkedIn has really become my own personal professional database of contacts, and it's a very valuable asset. But it won't grow as quickly or organically as it could if you put a few minutes a day into it. I also suggest that even if you're introverted and you kind of avoid networking style events, which, by the way, have proliferated with the likes of, what's it called? There are a couple of audio and video networking platforms available these days. So it's very easy to find people to meet. But if you're naturally hesitant and you don't find it enjoyable to meet new people, I suggest that introverts consider networking like having a meeting where instead of just showing up and feeling overwhelmed, that you find out some of the people who are planning to attend and make a beeline for them and consider it like an appointment. And it takes some of the pressure away from the fear of walking into a room and not knowing anybody. So those are a couple of tips.
Yeah, those are great advice. Ruth, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us. And we've been chatting this morning with Ruth Stevens, and this wraps up another edition of On the Mark here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB. If you've missed a part of our chat today and you want to catch it again or share it with somebody else, you'll find it archived at WSKB Community Radio's YouTube page. Guest this morning has been Ruth Stevens. Thanks for being here, Ruth. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. We'll see you next week in another edition of On the Mark.